Hey, everybody, welcome to Keep the Change. Hope you guys are having a great week, and I thank you for joining us. You know, what's interesting is we have such interesting guests on this show. And as I've said to you before, every time I do this, I love the experience of meeting folks that, in many cases, other than my own kids or my wife, I've never met before. And I have a team member, Hannah Walker, who's actually part of my social media team. She's a publicist. And I asked her the other day if she knew someone that would be just a great asset to our Keep the Change podcast. And she immediately said yes. And I've spent about 10 or 15 minutes with this young man, and I would agree that that is true. And today we have a treat all the way from the other side of the pond. I'm going to introduce to you Dr. John Clements. Now, let me tell you a little bit about John. John's a medical practitioner. He's a pediatrician actually, who's been doing that for over 50 years. He has a massive heart for children in developing countries. And you can hear his heart and his soul and his love for Jesus as he talks today. His early career included running a Christian mission hospital in the Peruvian Amazon. Are you kidding me? Followed by posting as a chief medical officer in Bangladesh and Afghanistan with the Save the Children Fund. Just incredible history. He joined the global leadership team for infant and childhood immunization in the WHO, the World Health Organization in Geneva. And over his 17 years with the United Nations, he's worked in over 100 countries, mostly in the developing world. He's taught public health at postgraduate level at a number of universities. He writes extensively, and he's published many books, book chapters, and articles in medical literature and health issues. In 2003, he moved to Australia, where he worked as a consultant with several United Nations and Australia-based international health agencies. He is an associate professor at the University of Melbourne. And in 2020, he was awarded member of the Order of Australia for his work in international health. John has two adult sons, both of whom work in the international aid sector. He's been an elder in an evangelical church for a number of years before moving to house churches. And if that's not enough, he's got a new book out, which I hope he gives us some opportunity to hear about, called The Gospel Unadorned. And I'll let him finish the whole description of that book. But thank you, Dr. John. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for being up early and talking to us here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and allow the audience to get the essence, if they haven't already, of the man you are.
How long have I got?
Whatever you need.
Right. Let's start fairly early on. I think my story really kicks off when I was at primary school, age 10, and I had a very strict school mistress, and she insisted we took a book out of the library every Friday and bring it back the next Friday. And by chance, by God, by whatever, I took this book out, which I was curious about, but I read it right through, and I must have been impressed because I put it down. It was the life story of Albert Schweitzer. I put it down and I said to myself, I'm going to do that. And I did. So putting that in context, not everyone, particularly in the younger generations, may not have heard of Albert Schweitzer. And the story is well worth telling. He was born in 1870-something in Germany, and he became a world-renowned organist. He played Bach and things like that. He made recordings, very successful organist, toured Europe, the darling of Europe in concert halls. 30 years of age, he got the call of God on his life. He went to medical school, got qualified, and spent most of the rest of his life in Gabon, what is now Gabon, in Africa, darkest Africa. It was a very primitive situation he got himself into. Built a hospital, provided services where no services were being offered, running a hospital, operating, and doing amazing work. He became internationally recognized for his writings, and in 1956 he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So a man of tremendous stature and moral courage. And it just spoke to the deepest part of my heart. I wanted to do that. And so I did the right subjects at school. I went through medical school. I trained in pediatrics and obstetrics, in public health and tropical medicine. And to my amazement, I didn't go to darkest Africa. I went to darkest Peru. I was offered the chance of running a hospital in the Amazon by a Catholic mission organization called Justice International, running out of Liverpool. And so I did that for a year. And looking back on it, it makes me shudder a little bit. I was straight out of medical school. I was 26 and I was running an entire hospital, having to do everything. I was a day's journey from the nearest base hospital. So it was a pretty exciting time. And it was, although a very hard year, it was seminal for me. I had to ask the question, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my career? Or is this a one-off and I shall go back to living a normal life? And I decided, yeah, it was something I wanted to pursue. So that launched me off. It took me away from clinical medicine and put me into public health, because I realized that standing at the hospital door waiting for sick children or sick patients to come to me was fine and noble and very appropriate. But if I could only do things out in the community, they wouldn't have to get sick and come to hospital at all. So I focused on clean water and vaccinations and good nutrition. And these were the things that had far more impact than simply treating the very sick, many of whom would die because they came too late. All right, I'll stop talking now.
No, don't. Please keep going. But what I'm hearing you say is it seems in Western medicine that we are about reacting and not being proactive. And so when you say that, you were ahead of your time. It sounds like you said, well, let's nip this in the bud. Tell us about that. But were you in Peru the whole time? Tell us about that. And what was it that made you feel like I need to help these people from the start, from fresh water, from good habits? What was it that touched you and said, this is where I can make the biggest impact?
Yeah, patients were coming so late to the hospital. They didn't trust Western medicine, and they certainly didn't trust the white nurses and doctors that were running it. I don't know how much you know about South America, but apart from Brazil, they speak Spanish. My population was common or garden farmers, people with little or no education, and they regarded somebody with a pale skin and brown eyes as un gringo. I was un gringo, el médico gringo. And that was an obstacle to overcome. And they were very reluctant to come to the hospital at first. And it took me, I would say, 6 months before they began to, instead of calling me el gringo, they would call me el doctor, which was good. But at the end, they were actually saying papacito, which was dear father. And I said, I'm 26, I'm not a father. Anyway, it was a great honor to be called papacito. So I was distressed that people were coming. For instance, mothers would come with obstructed labor. That means the baby wasn't being delivered. And it would be sort of 2 hours before they died. It was so distressing. Children would come in dehydrated from diarrhea. Sometimes I could save them, oftentimes I couldn't. I buried a lot of my patients there. And I think that was a pretty awful thing for a young doctor to have to do.
So did you always know, you talked about the influence that Albert Schweitzer had on you, and you and I had talked before we even turned the recording on about that, and that was the moment, that was the turning point at 10 years old. Tell us a
Mm.
little bit about, did you always know, did you have family that was in medicine as well? Or what was the impetus that got you to the point, besides Albert, that you said that is the direction I'm going to take? Or was it just that?
I think it happened a long, long time before that. My great, great, great grandfather was a guy called Moses Pickett. He
What a
lived
great
in
name.
Wiltshire in the middle of England, and he followed John Wesley, and
Mm,
he called himself a primitive Methodist. And I've had Methodists in my family line all the way through. My grandfather preached in a Methodist church in Leicester for 50 years. I mean, not without coming home every Sunday for 50 years. And my son is definitely a priest. And I feel that I'm benefiting from generations of faith.
mm.
So I don't think it's something we can dismiss. It wasn't just about that book. I was benefiting from a heritage there. I think
Yeah.
that was really important.
What's your thoughts on this? I'd be interested to hear your take. I have, um, I, I'm not going to bore you with my details of where I was, but I do believe that about midlife, I found Jesus found me after 10 years of sobriety. And at that point, I happened to live in Santa Cruz, California. And drove by a church. It was a non denominational Christian church, Dr. John called Santa Cruz Bible. And I liked the cars in the driveway. At that time, I was kind of a new ager. I really didn't, I knew God existed, but didn't know who he was. I had grandparents, though, that were Lutherans. And as a matter of fact, even though my parents were Unitarian, my grandparents, my grandmother was a praying prayer warrior. And I somehow drove by this church and saw this church. And I thought, that's where I need to be because they had nice cars in the driveway. So I pulled in. And as soon as I got in there and heard the pastor, I knew I was home. And oh my gosh, if you think about that, that I believe that my grandmother was the reason I was there because I think she prayed over me for decades and took me from that brokenness to that place of coming face to face with Jesus. And it sounds like you had the heritage. You had people that it was in their DNA to spread the gospel. And you were guided to this journey that you're on. So,
Absolutely.
so my question for you is, what's your thoughts about that relative praying their grandson into a relationship with Jesus? Because I didn't pick him. He absolutely picked me.
I think there's too many stories like yours to discount it. I'm
Yes.
absolutely sure that your family had an impact. I
Mm,
confronted my aunt, my father's sister, once. I said, I'm sure that somebody in my family has been praying for me. And
mm.
she smiled. She said, yes, me. So I
Oh,
actually found one of the people who'd been praying for me. So
oh,
I'm with you there, Bart. Yeah.
yeah, that's good. So here you are. You're in the can I say this, the Peruvian jungle. You are making this difference. The relationships that you're developing with these people is that they call you Papa. Is that what I heard, right?
Well, Papacito, the ito bit, is the diminutive form, which is the
Mm,
endearing form. So it's not just
yes.
father, it's dear father, which
No.
is quite beautiful. Quite
Yes, that
beautiful.
is.
Mm.
So, what was your journey from there? You've obviously making a huge impact. You're young, and how big? Obviously, you're changing culture in how they take care of themselves. But talk about your faith and how it paralleled with your journey in medicine at this period of time.
Yeah, I came back from Peru, a single young man, and met my wife, who we remained husband and wife for 45 years, and sadly she died last year.
Mm,
Um, so she was my companion in everything that I did after that. Um, I would say that my faith had quite a few dips in it. And I don't think that's an unusual thing. And I think young people who are struggling with their faith need to know that it's quite normal to have a dip in your faith. When I was working in Geneva, I had a similar experience to you, Bart. I found a church that just opened their arms to me, and it was the start of a new phase in my spiritual walk. I eventually became an elder in that church, and I learned so much there. It was a wonderful experience. In terms of my profession, I had a few blind alleys to go down. I knew I wanted to work for the World Health Organization. It's actually very difficult to get in. You need languages, you need experience in developing countries, and you need your professional background. And it's quite hard to get those three in sufficient levels to impress people to get in the door. So I really feel that, like so many times in my life, God just opened doors for me, and I knocked on a door just at the right time, and I was there for 17 years, which was the majority of my career. So ups and downs, lots of ups and downs.
Tell us about that time in the World Health Organization and the different experiences that you had that were just life-changing for you, that impacted who you are today at this season.
Well, when I was in Peru, I was so frustrated because I was reliant on other people upstream, as it were, to provide what I needed, to provide all the resources, and they didn't come through. And I guess I just got frustrated that being at the end of the line is not an easy place to be. And I wanted to get further upstream and try and make a difference. Right. And it was a slow process. I didn't just get off the bus one morning and say, right, I'm in a particular position. I had to work my way up. I had to get a master's degree in public health and so on. But in WHO, it was an incredibly privileged position because, for instance, we would decide that a particular issue, for instance, sterilization of injection equipment, was a priority globally. So we'd sit down and plan how we were going to address that. And we'd bring in, we'd write to maybe a dozen world experts and say, would you like to come to Geneva and have a little chat? And yeah. Everyone wants to jump on a plane and get to Geneva. And to be able to whistle up the top level cream of the world's expertise with a telephone call or a letter was an amazing experience and very humbling. So we could gather people around a table and nut out global policy just like that. And it was very heady stuff. And so I was right upstream trying to make a difference to global policy. And that was exciting.
So you've had 9 lives. You've had these, not only do you have this one book that you've got to tell us about, but you could write a book about all these experiences.
Well, I have written my life story, but it's only for my grandchildren. It's not for publication.
And I bet they're proud of you there, my friend. What an incredible journey your life has been. So tell us now, you were with the WHO for 17 years, transition after that, and kind of lead us on. You moved to Australia and you've become active in community churches. You've written a book. Tell us about the transition that happened with the move to Australia.
When you live in the international bubble in Geneva for as long as we did, you really lose your national identity. And so my wife Vivian and I sat down one day and said, well, where are we going next? We'd been living in New Zealand and we'd visited Australia, and we just thought that Australia had the most career opportunities for me to continue in international health, but as a consultant, self-employed. And so it proved to be. I worked with UNICEF, WHO, the World Bank, a few other organizations, and really enjoyed the transition to being self-employed. And my retirement as such wasn't a day, it wasn't an event, it was just a fading out, if you like. And I really faded out. I needed open heart surgery 2 years ago, and that put a full stop to my that sort of life. I haven't worked since then. I haven't been entirely idle, but I haven't worked. So I really enjoyed being my own boss and choosing whether I worked or I didn't work. And it left me time for doing other things. And I did something that I'd wanted to do for a long time. I trained as a chaplain. So I got a clinical pastoral education certificate and worked as a volunteer chaplain at the local hospital, which I loved. And I also joined the Victoria Council of Churches Emergency Ministries, which was a chaplaincy that was deployed on the streets in times of crisis. So when there was a shooting, when there was a fire, when there was a flood, we would be deployed to be on the streets and not proselytize, but take the love of Christ with us as we went to minister to people who were suffering and in personal crisis.
My gosh. So talk to me about the transition. I'm sorry to hear about your wife, and my heart goes out to you. We've just met, but I really feel that we're kindred spirits in here. And I think that's a little bold on my part, because I'm putting you up on this pedestal, but I see your heart and I see who you are. And I get that. How long were you married to your wife, and what was her name?
Vivian. I was married for 45 years.
Oh, fantastic. So I get the love story in your voice.
Yeah.
And I congratulate you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a very difficult year to adjust. Here, I know Vivian isn't coming back.
Yeah.
Here, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I'm still in transition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, again, my condolences to you, and what I've seen just in our little bit of time, what you did is you followed another passion to become a chaplain, to do the work for Christ. And how long has this book been in process? And tell us about the book and where that came from and your heart behind that.
In Geneva, in Melbourne, I ran a men's group with a number of friends for 5 or 6 years. And so that meant that I had to focus on some teaching. And I did a lot of Bible study. I learned a lot in that period of time. And when Vivian died, I had a lot of good Christian men friends who supported me in different ways. And one of them was a guy called Alan Mackenzie in Geneva. We were on a Skype call together, and he said, in a very creative way, wanting to give me something else to do, he said, write a book. I said, I don't have a book. I've never wanted to write a book. I've never planned a book. He said, write a book. So when the Skype ended, I got a pencil and I made a list of chapter headings I might be able to write. And that sort of tipped me over the edge. And in 2 months, I'd written this stupid thing. It all came tumbling out.
Whoa. Did you say 2 months?
Yeah.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh.
What took the time was getting a publisher and waiting for the printers to actually produce the book. So that was 10 months ago I started writing.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I think I've been working on mine for 2.5 years. But you certainly have a great story to tell. So tell us about the book. Tell us about the impetus of the book, the essence of it. And there you go. If you're on a screen, you see the book. So he's showing it to us. But go ahead and tell us about it, and really the soul of this, if you would.
So it's called The Gospel Unadorned, Deconstructing the Religious Church. And I was talking to an American friend of mine the other day, and he said, that's inflammatory. Yes, it is. It's inflammatory. and people are not always going to like what I've written. But I contrast the unadorned gospel, and I put my own definition of the unadorned gospel together. It's faith alone in Jesus alone. And I claim, and I'm open to dispute, that that's the fundamental building block of our Christian faith. If you have that building block, then other things follow. Who is Jesus? Was he born of the Virgin Mary? Did he die on the cross? Was he resurrected? And so on. So there are obviously the theology behind Christianity is much more in depth than that. But the building block that I'm claiming is faith alone in Jesus alone. And if you look at the cover, you'll see that it's a stone chisel and hammer and brick dust. And what I do is to try and identify the other side of Christianity than that very simple, unadorned gospel. And that is the religious church that since the time of Constantine at 315 AD, we have had imposed on us rules and regulations and teachings which are not necessarily scriptural, and worse than that, many of them have pagan origins. So I try and unpack the ones that I think we should question, but I also identify elements of Christianity which are absolutely essential to keep. For instance, Holy Communion. You can't throw that away. That's at the heart of Christianity. So
I'm going to stop you there, because some of the folks listening to this could be believers, some are not. But when you say that, talk to us. When you say Holy Communion is at the heart, talk about that. Why is that so true?
On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he was with his disciples in a room and having the Seder, which is the Jewish name for the Friday evening meal on Passover. It's a special Passover meal. And he was doing what every Jew did in that time, and still does. They had a meal, they broke bread, they had wine passed round. And so he did everything according to Jewish custom. But then at the end of the meal, he explained that right now, this is the start of a totally new era, a new promise, a new covenant. And the bread is now symbolic of my body that's broken, and the blood is symbolic of my blood that's going to be shed. And that changed everything. That was the start of everything that we now understand as Christianity. Yes. And he said, do this as often as you can and remember me. And we should.
Yes.
That was an instruction. And it's such a beautiful thing. I think having a meal with other Christians, or even inviting non-Christians to your table, can be such a tremendous opportunity to share the gospel. You don't have to shout religious jargon. You just have to show Christ's love to people around you.
Good. My wife listens to a lot of podcasts, and she talks about everybody now. Not everybody, but the one she's listening to, it's in her consciousness, is talking about community. And where community is important is in a meal and coming together. So my wife has 2 fire pits in the backyard, Dr. John, and she took the pool table out one night in the middle of the night. The pool table moved out, and in its place is this circular area where we can get together and have community and come and love on each other. No matter what anybody believes, just love on each other. And what's cool about this is we started a ministry at our church that you may be familiar with. It's a worldwide ministry called Celebrate Recovery. It's a 12-step program, and it's Christian-based. And about January of last year, so it's coming up on a year, we got a number of leaders together that were people whose heart wanted to serve Christ in recovery, and they had recovery or codependency, or they were insecure, whatever it was. They had hurts, habits, and hangups of life, and they wanted to serve God in this way. And about 9 of them started to show up, and then 11, and then 14, and 15. And we got together, Dr. John, every Sunday for 9 months. And then we opened it up in our church on Mondays. And I've got to tell you, last night, as we're opening up our meeting and we're doing our prayer circle, there's 15 or 20 people in this prayer circle of leaders. And I'm saying God is good. But it started, Dr. John, with community. It started with a meal. And we eat so well and we love so well. So thank you for landing.
Can I use that as an entry point to talk about something I'm very keen on in my book?
Oh,
and that is the word ecclesia. Ecclesia. It's a Greek word.
Yes.
And it was first used 300 years before Christ in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible that was translated into Greek. And when Moses led the Israelites out of the desert, he led them out of Egypt, and he got them all together to address them because they started moaning. And the word that describes the assembly of the people is the ecclesia, and the word means the called out ones. So
spell it for us.
Ecclesia.
Yes.
Ekklesa. Ecclesia.
Thank you.
And
the called out ones. I want to, keep going. Thank you.
So they were called out of Egypt, which symbolizes the world, Satan, bad place to be. They were called out of that place. A little bit later, the Israelites were taken into captivity in Babylon, and they stayed there for 70 years. And then God provided a way to take them back to Israel. But only a very small proportion of them chose to leave Babylon and go back to the Promised Land. They didn't do well in the Promised Land. They invented a whole pile of rules and regulations based on the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And eventually, God sent his only begotten Son, whose ministry, believe it or not, was to the Jews. It wasn't to the world at that point. His job was clearly to call the Jews out of Judaic, Pharisaic law. So that was the next call out. When the church was formed, 200 years or more, it did well. It was very simple, no hierarchy, no buildings, met in homes. Constantine came along, and in 315 AD, he made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. And that went on until 1500, when Luther came along, and he objected to Rome charging for forgiveness of sins. It was called indulgences. And his efforts resulted in the Reformation and the formation of the Protestant Church. But unfortunately, half of Christianity stayed in Catholicism. They didn't want to move out of the place they were in. But the Protestant churches, in the plural, didn't leave behind Catholicism. They dragged so much of it with them. The priest, the church, the ceremonies, they all came with them, and they just modified it a little bit. And that was good, but it wasn't finished. And my book says, I think, and I'm not alone in this, that there is another call out, and that is calling Christians out of the religious church.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say in a very simplistic way, that not the way you would say it, but what I'm hearing is it's not about the rituals. It's not about the rules. It's about the relationship. And that is the church of love. That's the church that Christ was calling us to, a relationship with him.
But we've contaminated church. We've contaminated it.
Yes.
We go to church on Sunday. We are members of the Catholic Church. It has become different from the ecclesia, which is a group of people. It has become a system. When we use the word church, we nearly always think of it as a system.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, and I'm going to end up, I'm going to put a pause on this, but I'll find out what time this is on. But we got some banging going on that I've been trying to, hopefully it would stop. But in the background, it sounds like somebody's hammering. And
yeah, there's a building site next door. Let me close the door and I'll see if I can.
okay. All right. We'll cut that out, but
No, it's still there.
okay, no worries. We'll do our best. But at this point, that part of this conversation obviously is going to get cut out. So what I want to do is I'm going to tell the editors, bring it back. So we're back on now. So, hey, Dr. John, tell me, you had talked about Holy Communion as being a big piece in your book. And as we kind of wrap up, give us the other key points that you talked about that you feel are messages that you want your book to bring.
Jesus made it quite clear that he was abolishing the priesthood and temple sacrifice and worship when he died on the cross. This is a fundamental understanding of what his death on the cross did. And what has Christianity done since then? It has gone overboard to reinstate the priest and the church building and the church system. And I'm not pontificating about what's right and wrong, but each chapter I put a point of reflection, challenging people to think about it. And is it right, for instance, to pray to Jesus and to Mary? I don't give the answer, but I'm asking people to think about that. Yeah. Is it right that the priest has robes and a dog collar and sits in a special chair in the church? Is there such a thing as a priest, an ordained priest in the Christian church? Now, almost everybody would say, of course there is. But Jesus said that I am a priest in the order of Melchizedek. He's our high priest. He's not in the order of Aaron, which is the priesthood of the Jews. He's in a completely different order. And everyone who has faith in Jesus is a royal priest, and that's in 2 Peter. So if you're listening now and you believe that you're a true Christian, welcome, you are a royal priest. And there is no difference between the laity and the priesthood. We are all priests, and we have one head, who is Jesus Christ. Amen. And if everyone believed that, Christianity would be such a different place.
Yes. And we'd love, there'd be a lot more love in the world. You know, the interesting thing for me was, I say this as kind of an opportunity to look at the relationship piece. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm not Catholic. I don't understand that. I don't like religion. I just want to point this out to you. I drove in that church as with 10 years of sobriety, but a lot of sin, a lot of brokenness. And sin really means missing the mark, right? And Dr. John had said that earlier when explaining it. And I walked in this place where I didn't belong in a church. And the first thing I knew was I was home. I heard music that was, frankly, we've got a lot of non-denominational churches in the U.S. where Christian rock and roll is, and that's actually where I met some of my publisher. I met him at a Caleb Fan Awards conference in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a Christian conference, Christian music award show. But when I was there, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm home. It wasn't rituals. It wasn't robes. The pastor had jeans on, right? And it was totally, again, non-denominational. It wasn't conservative. It was just what made me feel like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I had no right to come to the church. There was nothing that was pulling it there other than what we talked about a long time ago. And that was my grandparents praying over me. And now as I do this church, Dr. John, with Celebrate Recovery, these are broken people. These are people that have former addicts. They've been in prison. They suffer from insecurity. You know what? They're everybody. Once
Sure.
somebody once said to me, everybody should go to Celebrate Recovery. A pastor said this, except but the ones who don't think they belong in Celebrate Recovery are in denial, because we all have hurts and habits and hangups,
Yeah.
and we all want to be loved, and we want to be supported. And that's the message that you've done your whole life, Dr. John. You're a man of love. You've served this world greater than 99% of the humans on this planet. You've got a message to send to others. And as we land this, tell me, what is it? I interviewed a guy named Pat Williams. I think I told you about Dr. John, and he's 82. And when I said to him, "What's next for you, Pat?" And he said, "Well, I've got 20 more books I'm going to write." So he said, "I always set long-term goals." He said, "The older I get, the longer term my goals are." And I said, that's classic. So what's next for you? What's your next journey?
Well, you're part of the next step. I've written the book and it's been published, but how do I get it to people? If they don't know it exists, they're not going to get it. So that's the phase I'm in now, is trying to reach people with the information about this book.
Yeah.
And I have a website, which is all one word, thegospelunadorned.com. So if people want to know about that, it's thegospelunadorned.com, all one word. So thank you for providing a forum to do that. But I've started to go down other rabbit holes. And these rabbit holes are that I have a feeling this message that I'm trying to disseminate has at least as much traction in other languages than English. For instance, I think South America, I think China would all be excited by what I have to say.
Yeah.
And I already have a friend of mine translating it into Arabic.
Oh my gosh.
And having worked in the UN, I know that the principal languages in the UN are English, French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Arabic. So those are my rabbit holes.
You don't do anything low key, do you? I mean, everything you do is at a 10x champion level. It's fascinating.
I'm an adventurer if you hadn't worked it out.
Well, thank you very much. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, you mentioned thegospelunadorned.com. Please hit that website. How would they reach out to you and to get to know you?
So I have an email they can write to me, john.clements7@icloud.com.
Okay. And it's CLEM.
My email address is in the book, but it's john.clements7@icloud.com.
And please reach out to Dr. John, because his wisdom is incredible, and we're honored. We're blessed. We are better people because we got to hang out with you today.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you there, Bart, because if you don't provide this podcast, people like me can't reach people that I would otherwise.
Well,
thank you.
Isn't it funny how synchronicity isn't synchronicity? There are no coincidences. It's God's planning that brought us together. And you know what I hope? One thing I love about this podcast is I've met so many incredible people, but I would be honored if sometime you and I can have a cup of tea together, because I'd love to look you in the eye and really expand our friendship. And hopefully we get together again on the podcast.
Love to do that.
Thank you, Dr. John. Again, reach out to him. Thanks everybody for listening. Again, the book's called The Gospel Unadorned. We appreciate you. We are honored that you would join us for this podcast. Thanks again. We'll see you guys next week on Keep the Change.
Bye.